And hello, my fabulous students. This is your favorite teacher, Mr. Jacobson. I'm excited to be with you today. Today, we are going to talk about the Articles of Confederation. So, the Revolutionary War is over. Now we have to set up some kind of a government. And of course, they don't want anything that could be considered tyrannical because of the oppression which the colonists experienced by the hands of the British in their minds. And so we're going to see how this all pans out. So let's begin. So after the war was over, we have 13 colonies, and they're looking for a form of government that can unite all of them together. Remember, they don't like each other. Uh, well, I shouldn't say they don't like each other. They don't. So not all the colonies are united. Okay, and then but they all were united under a distrust for British oppression or tyranny or anything like that. So that kind of united them, right? However, this is going to lead to an intentionally weak form of government under the document, the Articles of Confederation, which was written by the Second Continental Congress during the Revolutionary War. So each state had its own constitution. Most of these documents were both written or adopted by state legislators. However, Maryland, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, they proposed a constitution for submitted to a vote of the people for ratification in their individual states. So it wasn't done by a state legislator in those three states. There were heated debates between conservatives who stressed the need for law and order, and of course, you had liberals who were more concerned about protecting individual rights and preventing future tyrannies. So just give you an idea. So conservative means they don't want things to change too much, right? And liberal means that they're okay with more change, if you will. So, so just keep those things in mind because conservative and liberal today don't necessarily mean the same thing. I mean, this was a long time ago. You know, we have over 200 years ago. Um, so conservative typically means stay the same. Liberals typically means, we're okay with change. All right, so commonalities in each state's constitution. So you have a list of rights in each of the state's constitutions, basic rights, freedoms, freedoms like life, liberty, and property, freedoms like the jury trial, and the freedom of religion. Those things are all listed in in the constitutions of the state's constitutions. You have separation of powers. You got the legislative powers, um, and those will be the ability to elect two House legislators, which will eventually be in effect here. We have executive powers as well. Executive power would be like the President of the United States, the mayor of a town, or the governor of a state. Those are all executive. And then judicial would be the ability to judge laws and, consider them constitutional or not. So separation of powers is a safeguard against tyranny, especially against tyranny of a too powerful executive. So there's going to be voting going on for the constitutions, and all white males that own property are going to be allowed to vote. This is going to be a requirement to sort of broaden the voting scale of it all. However, you're still going to have, white males who are poor or propertyless or something like that, that they don't fit the criteria to vote. That's still going to be around. And if you want to run for office, or hold an office, then you got to be slightly better than just a property owner. You have to be pretty educated. And anyway, there were stipulations involved. The Articles of Confederation is going to get written around the same time as Jefferson writes Declaration of Independence. We have John Dickinson who's going to write the first draft. However, the Second Continental Congress is going to look at it. They're going to modify it to give more power to the states. And that's going to be known as the Articles of Confederation. It's going to be adopted in 1777. And I'm going to talk about three parts of the Articles of Confederation and the rest to help you understand it. One, we have the ratification process, the structure. Second would be structure of government, and third, the separation of powers. So how do we ratify here? So approval of the articles was delayed by a dispute over state claims to the vast American Indian lands west of the Alleghenies. So again, who gets all this land uh, far west, right? And there are some states like Pennsylvania that wanted it, Virginia wanted it. Who gets it? So some states like Rhode Island and Maryland are like, none of us should get it. But for one thing, I mean, Maryland's way over here. Rhode Island's this tiny little speck, right? So the bigger states, that brush up against the West are like, we should get it, blah blah blah. But because Rhode Island and Maryland kind of put their foot down, they decide, okay, maybe we'll have this new central government and they will decide the jurisdiction of what happens. So when Virginia and New York finally agreed to cede claims to the western lands, the articles were ratified in March of 1781. It's interesting how the articles took a while to get ratified, and one of the reasons is because all this extra land that was around, who gets it, right? Everybody wants it. You have structure of government happening. So the articles established a central government that consisted of just one body, um, and that made up a Congress. Are you with me here? So Congress is what we consider in the Articles of Confederation unicameral, which means one house. Each state was given one vote, with at least 9 votes out of 13 required to pass important laws. There were no separate executive, no separate judiciary or court system. Amending the articles required the unanimous vote, which would be kind of hard to do. A committee of states with one representative from each state could make minor decisions when the full Congress was not in session. So here you have a comparison of unicameral versus bicameral. Bicameral is important because that's going to be the type of legislation that's going to emerge from the U.S. Constitution when the Articles of Confederation are failing. Congressional powers. So we have the articles gave Congress the power to wage war, like treaties, and send diplomatic representatives and borrow money. However, Congress did not have the power to regulate commerce or to collect taxes. So, okay. To finance any of its decisions, Congress had to rely upon taxes votes by each state. So, for Congress to collect money, they had to get kind of permission from each state, which is problematic. Neither did the government have to have the executive power to enforce its laws. So the 13 states intended the central government to be weak. It consisted of a weak Congress and no executive or judicial branch. So what are some of the accomplishments of the Articles of Confederation? So despite all this, you do have this idea of independence, right? So the US government could claim credit for Washington's victory. They could negotiate a treaty with Britain for peace and the right in Paris. Um, you got the Land Ordinance of 1785. Congress established a policy for surveying and sailing Western lands, and so they can make laws. Um, Northwest Ordinance of 1787 for the large territory lying between the Great Lakes and the Ohio River. So if you look at all this territory here that's sort of shaded in, that would be the Northwest Ordinances. Uh, Congress passed an ordinance or a law that set the rules for creating new states. The Northwest Ordinance granted limited self government to the developing territory and prohibited slavery in the region. So, again, we see that there are attempts by the colonists to put an end to slavery. And although it's not going to be easy, especially in the South, where slave labor is a strong necessity in the minds of the people down there, at least with the new territory that's coming in, laws can try to get passed saying, okay, we're not okay with this anymore. So, by reserving land for schools and banning slavery, the government made the Northwest Territory attractive to both white and free black settlers. So, the weakness of the articles are as thus, right? So, we got in foreign affairs, America was not was in a great deal of debt because of the war, and European nations had little respect for them because they could not pay their debts off, nor could they even have the power to collect taxes in any significant way. And if there was a crisis, it was just it stifled them to act collectively as the United States, right? The U.S. could not enforce the Treaty of Paris. And what I mean by that is that so the Treaty of Paris says, for example, the British have to vacate all the land that is now in in the American possession, right? But we still had British who didn't leave military posts or in the frontier, forts, whatever like that. They didn't leave, and the Americans weren't powerful enough to really say you better get out or else, kind of thing. They could not force states to repay land that the loyalists lost. And so, another thing in the Treaty of Paris was that, hey, whatever land that the loyalists lost, you need to give it back to them. And that was agreed upon, but they couldn't do that in any true fashion because it required them having to collect money. So, you have eternal affairs happening as well. The 13 states treated one another as rivals, especially economically. They placed tariffs and other restrictions on the movements of goods across state lines. And then several states faced boundary disputes with neighbors that increased state tensions. Then you have economic issues happening. So Congress had no taxing power and could not request the states to donate money for national needs. They had no dependable revenue to repay the money it borrowed for fighting wars. The printing of worthless money by states added to this problem. So eventually, stuff like problems are going to happen because the Articles of Confederation aren't doing what they should be doing, right? It's not making their life necessarily easier. It's leading to a lot of confusion. It's purposely weakened the central government. So we have Shays Rebellion that is one of the effects of all this, right? So in the summer of 1786, you have Captain Daniel Shays, a Massachusetts farmer and Revolutionary War veteran, led other farmers into an uprising against all the higher taxes that were going on in Massachusetts. They had imprisonment of debt happening, so debt prisons, and they had a lack of paper money in circulation for people to even pay. So the economy is really suffering. The rebel farmers stopped the collection of taxes and forced the closing of debtors' courts. In January of 1787, when Shays and his followers attempted to seize weapons from the Springfield Armory, the state militia of Massachusetts broke the rebellion once and for all. But again, that's just one effect, right? I mean, so it's not working. The British might even be kind of laughing at the Americans at this point, thinking that they're going to be begging for their help any minute here. So it's interesting because we always think revolution is done and then things get better. That's not the case. They're bumping their heads. They're still trying to figure this thing out, the colonists, but they will figure it out as far as creating a government that can be have the needs and necessities that it needs to be a powerful and vibrant nation eventually. So go ahead and write that summary, and we'll see you when you return.